pop that on there. But yes, so we're just making our nice self-hug blanket. And it just feels nice. And it's great to practice in because we don't move in those hard and fast ways so much, certainly not at this time of the year as we're starting to come out. In case you didn't notice yesterday, who noticed yesterday that it wasn't dark at 5 o'clock? Because it wasn't. So the wheel is turning, we are coming out the other side, but it's just that time where it's just still a bit cold, it's still a bit dark and a bit drizzly outside, and it may be, so certainly for me, you might be running a bit low on the vitamin D stores and those other bits and pieces. You might just be feeling like you need a little bit more love. So we're going to come down to laying like we usually do. Oh, if I can get there in my blanket. And you can keep your blanket on if it's comfortable. It's nice to have that padding around the hips. We've been playing a little bit with working the legs. We spent some time last week and the week before, in fact, just feeling about dropping the legs back into the pelvis and the importance of that with regards to hip health, because we know that when we are tight in the front of the ankle and the kneecaps are lifted, actually pulls the head of the femur, the top of your thigh bone, forward in the socket of the hip, so in the acetabulum of the hip. So if I put my hands this way, if we've got let's do some anatomical trickery here. So if we think that the kneecap is here, and if the hip is sitting in the acetabulum, and it is kind of at this, nothing's linear, so it's kind of these sort of almost diagonal, it's a very gentle diagonal orientation. And what happens is when we lift the kneecap, or we're firing the quads, we've got tight hip flexors, that actually it pulls the kneecap back, but it forces the ball head of the top of the thigh, it forces that forward. And these are micromillimeters, but it does bring it forward in the socket, and it causes things like wear to the labrum. So for those of us that are dancers or no dancers, you'll have heard of the much maligned labral tear, and it is maligned because it does not feel very nice. But for those of us that experience, those tightnesses, those imbalances in the hips, it starts, the way to work with that is to get right back down into the feet, to find the front of the snooker ball heel. So if we think of it all like curves maybe, so if we're in the front of the snooker ball heel and we can let the ankle soften back, the toes go long in response to that, and we get this kind of rooting feeling that happens down through the very, very center of the foot, sort of where the root of the toes meet the ball and socket. And then can we go in sort of behind the kneecap, perhaps if we think about the roundness of the front of the knee and that concavity space that we've got in the back of the knee, can we let the shins, the tibia and the fibula, can we let those drop back towards, when we're laying with the knees bent in this way, can we let the shins sort of drop back towards the thigh bones? And we'll feel that when we do that, when we let the front of the knee sort of drop back to the bottom of the thigh bone, then there's a dropping back at the front of the hip that allows the pelvis to tilt away. And we'll go through that again, just so that we can get some feel into that. So it's just letting that front of the snooker ball heel, root of the toes, let that drop back. We feel that nice slope of the front of the shin into the top of the foot can really relax and let go. And when we're wearing the winter boots, we can get quite a lot of tension here. So we're really thinking about softening that back. And if it feels a bit stiff or a bit sticky, or you can't feel, was another one. I couldn't feel the front of my ankles for a really long time. Didn't even know I had fronts of ankles for a really long time. But if that's for you, then we keep the knees nice and still and just practice that foot rolling out onto the outer edges and out onto the inner edges, and kind of can we start to become aware of and get a sensitivity to the front of the ankle, top of the foot, that skin there. Can we move the bones underneath the skin of the front of the shin, top of the foot there? And then we move up the front of the shin to the front of the knee, so sort of just below the kneecap. And again, when you roll onto the outer and inner edges of the heel balls, you can feel the outer, inner and outer edges of the knee. And you can just have a play with the tissues there, because again, the ligaments, there's a lot of ligamentous material. There's not a lot of muscle around that area. There's an awful lot of dense connective tissue. So can we let the bones rest in the hammocks of the fascia around the knee, particularly sort of the top of the shin bones and the very, very bottom of the long thigh bone. And of course, the whole lot's sort of capped over the front with the kneecap. So can we let the shin bones rest back towards the base of the thigh bone? It's almost like they're a little, wigwam tent. And we want the shin side of our wigwam tent just to rest back into the femur side of our wigwam tent. Because when we do that and we let those two shin bones soften back, that then gives the femur permission to drop back. And we feel a shift in the ball and socket joint. And the pelvis then, if we are habitual in the way that we keep our pelvis tucked under, many of us are, and I've been sat down for quite a lot of hours this morning and I can feel it. The pelvis stays in this tilted position where the tail is tucked under. So can we let the drawbridge of the sacrum unroll? And again, if we've been working with tricky things this week, I know a few of us are, it's good to let the tail uncurl. When we're dealing with things that are stressful or a bit shocking, or however they present themselves, the tail tucks under and the head comes forward. It is they call it the fight and flight response, but it's not always fight and flight. It's just a generic response to things we don't like, probably, rather than fighting and flighting. It's just, if things are difficult for us to deal with, the jaw tenses, the eyes come forward, the head comes forward. We protect our viscera on the front. Of course we do. We would always want to do that, particularly when things are to do with heart. As I say, working a little bit with grief at the moment. The shoulders tend to come around the heart, the head tends to come forwards and down in a protective manner around the heart, and the pelvis tucks under, and kind of the thighs and the front of the hips come in towards the tummy button. So we fold in on ourselves in a protective way. So can we feel that with our huggy blanket and some padding at the back of our pelvis, that we can start to, just like the bracken, just let the spine unfurl? And for some of us, pinned myself on the screen this week, so your other screens aren't so apparent. So for some of us, that might allow tears to come through, and those other emotions, just if they're being held in there, just to come through. And that's fine. We just let that, let those rattle through. They should shift. We don't want to keep them stuck in the tissues. So as we let the pelvis, the sacrum, just roll away, we get that lovely broadness to the sit bones. Can we get the broadness between the sit bones, the kind of that undercarriage to the pelvis, which gives us a lightness to the legs. And last week we were working with taking the knees out to the sides and working with the slings around the sides of the legs and around the back of the pelvis. And just working with that space when the legs come in towards us, just working with that space at the front of the hip. So we've got that lovely crease. And if that crease has become a little bit close coupled this week, it's fine if it has, because that's what we do. We can take the thumbs just to the front of the hip, top of the thigh, and we can smooth there. And it just helps to create a little bit of space, and it can feel quite comforting. Just to use the long thumb. So we're thinking about this, you know, yes, we've got the pad of the thumb, but we've got this lovely long thumb bone that will take you all the way down into the root of the thumb, where it joins at the wrist. So we've got quite a lot of surface area that we can just drop into that space. And just let the legs have a little bit of a break from the close coupling of the pelvis. And the more we do this, the more we find the low spine will get longer, but also that the legs will become a little bit lighter. So the right thigh can just drop back into the socket. Do the left one so that you can see. But the thigh just drops back through the socket, through the back of the pelvis into either the blanket underneath you or the mat underneath you or the ground underneath you, whatever you've got. We feel that the thigh pulls back and through into the ground, and the knee can just float in towards us. And not much happens. There's not much change in the back of the knee. Can we leave the foot floppy? You can test that theory by giving the lower leg a bit of a wag. And can we just let everything drop through and just let the foot flop about? It's good for the soul, floppy feet. And when we let the right foot just come back down to the ground, just let the foot find the ground as it is. Let the toes extend, let the heel get heavy. We can get very caught up in the head when we're dealing with big things. So with that in mind, it's good to get the feet back onto the ground so we feel that reconnection. So we can do on the other side. And again, just let the thumb rest, let the root of the thumb rest. Just keeps the hip flexor out of the game a little bit more. You know, if we really do favour the hip flexors and the quads on the front, can we send the work round the back? You know, as the sit bone drops away, there's an impact, there's an effect on the hamstring. There's an effect on the other muscles of the leg when we invite the quads to stand down a little bit. They don't need to be the prime drivers. They can be part of the whole group. Can we do that? And again, there's not much that happens in the back of the knee. And can we leave the foot floppy? Then the foot can come back down. We're going to come back into the right side, and you take your time. I will move through things, but if you're playing with something where it feels right to stay with something, stay and play. So we're coming through the right side again. And we're going to let the knee float in towards us, and then just feel that the heel gets picked up by the imaginary hand, imaginary hammock from the ceiling, imaginary whatever it is, whatever works for you. We leave the back of the pelvis alone. Very easy for the leg to come in towards us, and then the pelvis gets pulled around. So we've got that anchorage in the sit bone. We want that. Can we feel that the tummy can soften back? Can we feel that the ribs, you know, that lovely V shape of the ribs, costal margins can just, back. There might be a big sigh out with that. And again, it might feel emotional because we're getting into the viscera of things. So once the right knee has come in, we take the left knee in as well. And find a heel. And this is where the padding comes in handy, because when we're just spending time on the back of the hips, letting the weight of the legs drop back through the back of the hips, the blanket helps, gives us something to connect to. But also it allows the two hip bones time to arrange themselves around the sacrum. Sometimes they're a little bit pulled out of alignment and things.
Yeah, might be good. I'm good.
Pop yourself on mute if you're.
I'll give you a shout afterwards. Unfortunately, I'm looking at a damp patch in my ceiling.
2 seconds.
Yeah.
So with that heavy heel, we're going to take that heavy heel and we're just going to let the heavy heel be drawn up. So again, we've got the softness in the front of the ankle, softness in the back of the knee, and we feel that there's space in the joints. So we've still got the floppy foot. We've got this lovely heel that's being drawn away, and it pulls the back of the knee open. And when we work in this way, and it might be, you know, when we work in this way, it's interesting because the brain loves to be doing. So it might be that, you know, the heel is getting drawn away and we're like, yes, drawing away with the heel. And then the brain thinks it has to lift something. And we feel this, you know, this doing, this kind of jarring that comes through the knee, or you feel that the hip flexors get engaged. Can we drop a little bit, come back through again? Because it just feels like the leg is being pulled away towards probably the top of the wall at the end of your mat initially. Because the higher up the leg comes, the more the tummy muscles have to work, or they won't, and it will go straight into the front of the thigh. So we have to be gentle with ourselves. And we have to keep coming back to letting the foot drop back to the point where it feels like things switch off, which is hilarious. They can't switch off because otherwise your leg would fall off, or so they don't. But if there's a feeling of relaxation, and it's just where muscles decide that they're not going to be the prime drivers anymore. And we can try with one leg and then the other. Interesting to notice jaw, shoulders, all of the things. It's nice to have the arms up over the body. Probably should have said that about 15 minutes ago, but hey. So we come into the other heel, and one leg may be more happy to be led by the lifty heel than the other side, but we don't worry about that too much. We always have a dominant leg and a not so dominant leg. So it's just finding that, where can we get that lift And that's not to say that it's not challenging to the tissues. And it's not challenging to the muscles. It is. We run into pockets of stiffness in the back of the calf. We might run into pockets of tension in the back of the knee. And can we pause there with enough upward lift from the heel? Can we feel that we can just let the calf bones and the shin bones and the thigh bones just to drop back? So it's this sort of reciprocal playing of the heel up towards the sky and the leg drops back down, and the heel is up towards the sky and the leg drops back down and drops back down. And like I say, the higher the leg comes up towards the ceiling, the more the tummy muscles have to get involved. So can we feel again the sit bones anchoring down into the ground so that the pelvis tilts away? That will send the work back in through the pelvic diaphragm, in through the scoopy front of the hips, in through to the main body of the inside back of the tummy. So the low spine is lengthening away. It gets drawn away by the legs. The whole lot gets drawn away by the legs. Eventually, you know, if we kept, and for those of you that have been here for a really long time will remember we used to do this once upon a time. I have forgotten all about it. But you know, if the heels keep lifting and keep lifting and keep lifting, it'll take you up into shoulder stand. But we have to lose the idea of trying to go up. We have to get ourselves into the knowledge that we drop down. So the heels get drawn up towards the sky, but the legs drop back through the pelvis, and the pelvis gets super heavy, which draws the tummy back towards the spine and lengthens out the low spine. Can we do that? And then we notice, you know, the bits. And for me, when there's tension in the shins or there's tension in the tissues around the ankle, you can just waggle the feet about or waggle the toes about. And just notice that that starts to relax and release different parts. Right hip flexor. Oh, right hip flexor that loves to get involved, gets involved. So the foot goes back down to the ground, reconnects the foot into the ground, and we can wave the knee about until the hip flexor decides that it's okay again. And the back of the pelvis can drop down and we can come in again. And then can we, with the heels being drawn up towards the sky, can we cross the ankles over? So this takes us into the inner thighs, something that for us is a little bit left out sometimes. The inner heel and the inside of the big toe joint being pulled up towards the sky can cross the ankles over. And we feel the inside of the thighs start to get involved, and then we can uncross. Let the hips stay broad. Give the knees a nice wave if the naughty hip flexor is getting involved. My right one is persistent, I think, is probably a kind word. Persistent in its endeavours to be involved. This is where we just, you know, we start to make friends with different parts of our body that are persistent and want to be involved. So, and can we cross the ankles over the other way and come out and bring the feet down to the ground and rest when you need to? It's, although it seems very light and floaty work, it can be quite challenging for those inner muscles, inner tummy muscles. Are we stabilizing and dropping through T12, through the inside underside of the ribs? Are we in the front of the spine, behind, you know, behind the guts of it all? Can we be in behind the pelvic organs? Feeling that there's a broadness that happens into the sacroiliac joint. Really starting to look at this as part of my work now. Because actually, you know, when we're very mobile, when we're very stretchy, are we destabilizing, or are things just being pulled into unhelpful shapes? So can we let the ground and the gravity put the pelvis back as it should be? Let the sacrum and the pelvis just soften. And we're pulled up by the heels and the inside of the heel and the big toes. And working through that crossing and uncrossing of the legs. It's not a big movement, doesn't need to be a big movement. But you can feel that the adductors will fire on the inside of the thighs. And bring feet back down. You're in the middle of your movements, take your time. And let the feet just touch back down into the ground. Feel the back of the pelvis. He's going to let the elbows come down into the ground. And then let the long arm bones just come back through their sockets. Let the front of the chest broaden and soften. Let the collarbones feel like they're going to slide off the edge of the shoulders. And we can just let the long little toe side on the left foot and the big toe joint and the inside of the heel on the right foot just pull down into the ground, which starts us off into that nice laying twizzle. And we can feel with the big toe joint of the right foot down into the ground, that will take the knee away and pull the front of the hip open. Can we use the elbows to breathe broad? To feel like the ribs are going out towards the elbows while the big toe joint on the right foot pulls down into the ground and takes the knee away towards the end of your mat, pulls the side of the waist open. And bring the sole of the right foot into the ground. It's just a rolling motion. It's almost like rolling out dough. The sole of the foot gets pulled down into the ground. And as we come to the long little toe side, the knee starts to shift out. Long little toe side. We get this movement that happens, you know, these deep, the deep pelvic postural things, postural muscles that lay on the inside of the pelvic bones, and we can feel them here. And we can start to get a little stretch on the inside of the thigh. And when the big toe joint comes down into the ground and the knee drops in to what drops down towards the ground, we get a little bit of a stretch on the outside of the thigh, so it goes straight into the IT band for some of us. And we breathe broad into the ribs. And then we're going to pull down with the right foot into the ground, let the back of the right hip get super heavy, and as we roll back to center, the left side will get drawn with it. And as we rest on the back of the pelvis, just notice the difference in the two sides. It might feel a little different. And then we can find the feet, find the elbows. We connect the whole body together. Legs come into the underside of the ribs, arms go through the ribs, into the underside of the ribs. So everybody meets in the middle. at solar plexus, so that the long little toe side of the right foot gets pulled down into the ground. And this time it's the big toe joint of the left and the inside of the heel of the left foot that get pulled down into the ground this time. Can we go in with no expectation? For what happened on the side that we worked with first? Doesn't matter. Maybe we get the same range, maybe we get less, maybe we get more, it doesn't matter. We're just interested in the connection. Breathe broad into the ribs. Let the elbows get heavy. Long arm bones always get sucked back through their sockets into the ribby spine. And we start to tease our way out through the waist, the underside of the ribs, through the deep, the obliques all sit here. The other week we were looking at making space between the rib and the hip. It's the same thing. Tend to get a little bit close coupled between the base of the ribs and the top of the hip. That happens a lot. So can we create space? The low spine will snake away towards the end of your mat, the thoracic spine, and the head will go upwards towards the top of your mat. The big toe joint on the left foot will take the knee away and just have that journey through the front of the thigh, called quadricep, into the front of the hip. Go deep on the inside of that hip bone. And just notice what's going on there. Notice if there's a grip at the hip, there might be gripping around the sit bone, there might be gripping around the groins, there might be gripping around the outer side of the hip. And as the foot rolls out to the long little toe side, and these are just natural progression of exploring the joint. The foot starts to come down to the ground. That takes the knee out to the side. It takes us up to the inside of the thigh, and the big toe joint, when it pulls down into the ground, will take the knee down to the ground, which will give you space in the joint. And when we do this, if you do this in your home practice, when we do this, it really starts to communicate or show to the brain, thinky part of the brain, the true correspondence that is happening between the sole of the foot and the ball and socket joint at the hip. As the sole of the foot rolls out to the outer edge and then back into the inner edge, you can feel the effect that has on the mobility of the hip, the structures of the hip. So the softness and dexterity and the strength of the foot is completely mirrored in the softness and the strength and the dexterity of the hip. This is important. So again, we just let the outer edge of the foot roll down, which will take the left hip down into the ground. And as the left hip gets pulled down into the ground, we let the right leg be taken along for the ride. And that'll bring us back to something that feels a bit like center. Notice how the back of the pelvis feels from when you started. Notice how the low spine feels. This is good. So we've been down a little while, so we're going to just be gentle with ourselves. The knees can float in. And we're going to come over onto whichever side is comfortable for you. Find your way to your square pose. We're coming over onto that side and just, I'm still in my blanket. I was supposed to come out of my blanket to do teaching and I haven't done it. So I'm going to stay in here till March probably. So just using the hands, bring ourselves up and find our way round to our lovely square pose. So again, you can have your padding under your knees, you can have your padding under your shins, fronts of the ankles, or you can have it under your hands and your wrists, wherever you need it. Really depends on the softness of the tissues. As I say, we tend to get a little bit stiff in the ankles over the winter because of the winter boots. So we feel like the big toe joints get pulled away towards the wall behind you. And again, when we do that, pulls the front of the ankle open. Pulls the front of the ankle down towards the ground. So it's not a floppy movement or a passive movement. The top of the foot, sole of the foot is still quite active. So from here, Lisa, you got me back this week. So if you're having cramp in your feet, so I am, my right foot's going to play me up rotten now. You can slide the opposite shoulder, so the crampy foot. So if your right foot is cramping, as mine is, you slide your left shoulder blade up towards your ear. Ribs don't move. And let the shoulder blade slide down. And same on the right side, because we don't want to leave you lopsided. Slide the shoulder blade up and then back down again. We can do this a couple of times on each side. Really brings us into the back of the ribs. And we can start to connect into the breath. So that lovely breath that broadens the ribs and lifts the ribs on the breath in. Can take the shoulder blades up towards the ears, and we can do both shoulder blades at the same time. Brings us into something that looks a little bit of like a nod towards a cat pose, let's call it that. Because the breath comes across the back of the base of the ribs. Almost pushes the shoulder blades out of the way. So that the out breath that draws the back of the ribs back and couples them back to the top of the low spine, draws the shoulder blades down with it, and that extends the head away from between the shoulder blades, because of course your head is coupled to between your shoulder blades, not your neck. So we just practice that a little bit. And it might be that for those of us that have practiced a lot, it might be that the deep breath that we're used to isn't quite there at the moment, and that's okay, depending on what we've got going on. A whole lot of compassion and a whole lot of self-love for our body that feels everything that we feel and is reflects everything that we feel. So just allow breath to come in as it wants to. We meet our movement where our body wants to, not where our will imposes. And the gift that gives us is that little parts of us get to let go. The tail can lift away a little bit. There's a little bit more space and length in the low spine. There's a little bit more space at the very top of the lumbars where it connects to the ribs. There's a little bit more lung that gets involved. There's a little bit more length to the neck, or a little bit more space at the cranial base. Eventually, the place that we're led to is walking up and down the inside of the spine. Almost like the night watch person, just doing their rounds, walking up and down, checking in on each individual vertebrae, each individual intervertebral disc, each individual process. Have you got enough space? Have you got enough support? Have you got enough fluid? Have you got enough breath? This is where our cat pose develops from. This is where these spinal wave movements develop from. They start off so small, tiny, tiny incremental movements. And as the spaces open up, as we get more fluidity, more dexterity, more strength, because it does require strength to move each individual vertebrae. It requires all the muscles doing a job. And when you're walking up and down the spine in this way, can we see if the response on one side is the same as the response on the other? Have we got a side that is leading and a side that is happy to be led? And can we match the two sides together? Can we get an equilibrium to the movement? Have we got a one foot that's heavier into the ground, or one knee that's heavier into the ground? Can we make them equal so that when we start to move, there's an equality to each side of the sacrum? There's an equality to the two sides of the lumbars. There's an equality to the two sides of the thoracic, each vertebrae. And we might find that, there are discrepancies in there, but there's nothing wrong with those. They just are, we all have them. Is there one hand that leans more heavily on the ground? You know, as we come up through the neck, are we further forward into one underside of the ear than on the other side? It's quite rare for us to have a head that's balanced as well. You know, we always have a head that tilts more slightly to one side than the other. This is how we are. But can we just start to unwind the rotations of the spine, because it does put itself into a rotation. Can we just start to unwind those slightly and bring it back into some balance? So next time we come back, towards something that looks a bit neutral, and we feel equally on both feet, equally both sit bones, and just let the pelvis be drawn, very aptly, like the sledge at the top of the hip bones. Can we keep our runners equal if we can? Doesn't matter if not. A little bit like when we were laying on our back. If you find that one runner is quite markedly in front of the other, that's okay. We can just come back to the point where we feel balanced. Sort of balanced. And we can, you know, we can take another run at it. We let the hands get pulled down into the ground, which pulls the underarms open. And can we breathe broad into the ribs? Just let the index finger of the hand and the long little finger side get pulled down into the ground. This helps to give you space into the underside of the wrist and then the inside of or the eye of the elbow, that soft part of the elbow. Can we find the space there? So there's a rotation to the long arm bone. There's a rotation to the humerus that starts to affect the shoulder blade, that draws the collarbone out. It gives us space between the base of the neck and the top of the shoulder. So as we find that going back, and the hand presents more strongly to the ground, then when we let the hand pull into the ground and it pulls us back to our square pose, when we get back there, the shoulders have found themselves into a very different arrangement. We might feel that there's more of an ellipse at the top of the shoulders where the head can, you know, the head can come out like the tortoise. This is important because we want space where the ribs and the neck spine meet. For a lot of us, you know, this is the site where the kyphosis starts, where the head starts to come forwards, where the ribs start to get pulled along for the ride and everything starts to go forwards and down. And the shoulders, the arms have a lot to do with that. So it's a great practice to pair to pair the hips, sort of like the crease at the front of the hip to oh, excuse me, the crease at the front of the hip to the crease at the underside of the arm. So where the arm meets the front and underside of the rib. Yeah, the front and under the front, sort of front of the rib cage, if you like. When we compare those together, this starts to give us great space into the thoracic. And it just starts to lengthen the thoracic out. We start to feel behind the lungs, behind the heart. We start to feel a support behind those structures into the front of the spine. And it lifts the head out from behind the collarbones. Can we touch into that space? It's quite a deep place. It requires practice to be here, but it's worth it. You know, these are the places where things tend to get a little stuck. Physically and emotionally. So can we keep dropping back in there? Can we keep dropping back into the front side of the neck spine, behind the windpipe, to go into the root of the tongue, behind the root of the tongue, behind the voice box. When we get in there, you might find that the eyes and the nose get drawn back into there as well. So there's almost like a retraction that happens where we start to disappear. The front of the face starts to disappear into the back of the head. There's nothing wrong with that. So we find our way back into our child pose. And we can take the knees a little bit wider if it feels good. And you can use your padded blanket to rest your head if that feels nice, or you can make potatoes with your hands. Whatever feels good. And as you just let the shoulder blades slide into the back of the head, can we breathe broad into the ribs at the back? Great for kidney function, this one. Just gives us a space into back part of the body, into those tissues. And again, when you breathe broad into the back of the ribs, can we just it feels like the shoulders just get foofed out of the way, shooed out of the way almost. And the breath out just lets the shoulder blades soften again. Just using the hands, just going to come up. Be careful with yourself, make sure you're not too dizzy. Well, not dizzy at all, but just checking in with yourself. And then just coming around, use your padding as a place to sit. We don't want to leave you all upside down, so we're just finding a place to sit. Have the legs out in front, have the feet in, wherever is good. Just finding the sit bones and let them get really heavy. And then just finding the hands around the knees somewhere. Let the elbows get heavy. So the hands around the knees and the heavy elbows all help to bring the humeruses, long arm bones, back through their sockets, back through the shoulder blades close around the back of the body again. Collarbones start to broaden out. Head goes back onto the top of the spine where it should be. Pelvis goes onto the bottom of the spine where it should be. Everything connects into the ground like it should be. It's nice and grounding. We're just giving the fingers and toes a wiggle. And just taking the legs long and the arms up over the head for a nice stretch through body. And just taking a moment to check in with yourself. Notice how you feel. If you're laying, just bringing the knees in. And the knees a nice hug. Have a little rock from side to side. Over onto whichever side is comfortable and return yourself back to sitting in your own time. You've worked hard today. Lovely to go gently with yourselves. It's been a pleasure as always. Good.
Thank you, Kaz. That was great.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Kaz.
Like I say, I think I'm staying in my blankie till March.
Yeah. Good
Yeah,
idea.
I like yoga like that.
Shall we stay?